The history of heavy.
We're going to get into it tonight. Hello and welcome to episode 22 of the History of Heavy podcast, the show that chronicles the... still can't do it, Dave. I still can't do the intro. We basically, we trace the chronology of heavy music across genre, song by song. I am Michael Huntsman. That is Big Daddy Dave Lieberman. Hello, Dave.
What up?
Hey, man. As Jello Biafra would say if Jello Biafra were saying it, welcome to 1970. We talked about 1970 last week, but we didn't talk about 1970 last week because we talked about Black Sabbath and exclusively Black Sabbath. That episode almost ended up being an hour and a half. It was a bitch to edit, but really happy with it. I hope people listened to it and liked it. That was a very, very fun conversation. As we say every week, there will be lots of continued Sabbath talk as we go. But because we were so focused on Black Sabbath last week, we didn't get into the changing of the decade. Last week was our first 1970 episode, which we only talked about Black Sabbath. So tonight, Dave, we're going to go to your cultural corner and we're going to talk about at least the early stages of the year 1970. So tell us, my friend, what was happening in this glorious new decade?
Dave's Control!
Well, as we've covered on the show, we are not a history podcast. We do this moment just to kind of level set and give a context of where this song is in the cultural framework of the time. And so I go to Wikipedia and I pull out some of the highlights. This January, and because we have several from this year, I'm splitting it up and just highlighting a couple of months for each episode. But this January and February was super duper light. One of the things that happened January 15th was after a 32-month fight for independence from Nigeria, Biafran forces formally surrendered to General Yakubu Gowon.
This was not planned, people. This was
This is off the cuff, buddy. This is just
professionals, brother. We're professionals.
You know, this is a callback to like 90 seconds ago when you mentioned Jello Biafra.
That's right. On a 1970 show.
On a 1970 show. We are all over the place.
Checking boxes, kid. Checking boxes.
That's right. But let's get into it. So January 1st, Unix time epoch. Or epoch. There's a whole battle raging online about if it's epoch, or epic. January 1st, basically Unix time starts. In computing, an epoch is a fixed date and time used as a reference from which computer measures a system of time. And Unix time is every second from January 1st, 1970. That's their reference point. Interestingly enough. February, multi-business conglomerate Virgin Group is founded as a discount mail order record retailer by Richard Branson in the UK. And that's really all I had for January and February. So I decided to go a little deeper into some cultural context. And I went with the Grammy Awards, which we've done in the past. To give you some context, Bridge Over Troubled Water by Simon and Garfunkel won Record of the Year. Bridge Over Troubled Water by Simon and Garfunkel won Album of the Year. Bridge Over Troubled Water by Simon and Garfunkel won Song of the Year.
It's real good.
So, new artist of the year was the Carpenters. So that's fun.
Duos were
Um,
big in 1970, apparently.
it was all about the duopoly. So that is the context for which we will be talking about our episode today. And Mike, I will give you back the mic, Mike.
Well, thanks. You went Beastie Boys on me, which I
Yeah,
appreciate.
just out of nowhere, because we're
Out
all
of
over the
nowhere.
place.
Here, this is
That's
a
what we
really
do.
weird episode so far, and I'm here for it. I'm loving it.
Dude,
Okay,
how can we do a straight episode about the Stooges?
we can't. We
We're
can't.
in character. That's all.
We are in character. So let's talk about a little gritty band from Ann Arbor called the Stooges. Inspired by the Doors and influenced by the garage rock of the Sonics and the Kinks, the Stooges were indeed formed in Ann Arbor, Michigan in 1967 by singer Iggy Pop, guitarist Ron Ashton, his brother, drummer Scott Ashton, and bassist Dave Alexander. Their intention was to create a new form of the blues that was not derivative by historical precedents, of historical precedents, that is. Gigging in and around Detroit, they quickly gained a local following around their intense live performances that had Iggy smearing peanut butter all over his chest and cutting himself with shards of glass. Around this period, sometimes Iggy is even credited with inventing the stage dive. In 1968, Elektra Records publicist and future Ramones manager Danny Fields, famously canonized in the Ramones song Danny Says, off of the End of the Century record, was sent to Detroit to scout the MC5. While he was in town, he caught the Stooges at one of their shows and ended up signing both bands. He signed the MC5 for $20,000 and the Stooges for a mere $5,000. So a very eventful and fruitful trip for Mr. Fields and Elektra Records. The Stooges released their self-titled debut album in August of 1969, and the record received mixed reviews and limited commercial success, though it did reach number 106 on the Billboard charts. In May of 1970, the band entered Elektra Studios in LA for 2 weeks, and on July 7th, their second album, Funhouse, was released. That record was a decided commercial failure and was widely ignored by critics. The Stooges would break up about 4 years later, and bassist Dave Alexander would die as a member of the 27 Club on February 10th, 1975. The Funhouse lineup, with Mike Watt on bass in replace of the deceased Alexander, released one final record called The Weirdness, all the way back now in 2007. And the legacy of the band as essentially the inventors of punk rock is well established. I mean, it's really the Stooges and the New York Dolls that's more or less invent punk rock. That is all well established, and I recommend for anybody that is interested to watch the great Jim Jarmusch documentary called Gimmie Danger, which I referenced last week. That is a great deep dive and just a highly entertaining music doc if you're interested in that sort of thing. But we're talking about Funhouse specifically, and that record, I think, fits particularly well in the conversation around our chronology of heavy. In retrospective reviews of that album, the record has been praised as a definitive classic by everyone. Rolling Stone, Spin, Pitchfork, every other music publication worth its salt has recognized Funhouse as kind of the masterpiece that it is. Songs from that album have been covered by the likes of The Birthday Party, Sonic Youth, GBH, Mission of Burma, The Damned, Depeche Mode, The Sisters of Mercy, and Rage Against the Machine. Happy 1970 birthday, Zach De La Rocha. Joey Ramone, Mark E. Smith, Jack White, Nick Cave, Michael Gira of Swans, Buzz Osborne of the Melvins, Henry Rollins, and Steve Albini have all called Funhouse one of their all-time favorite records of any period. Tonight we'll focus on track 2, which is called Loose. But any of the songs of the 7 on this record could have been chosen as representative of heavy as it relates to the Stooges and their contribution to what we are calling heavy music for the purposes of that podcast, for this podcast. So, Dave, let's get loose and talk about the Stooges. I am intrigued by what you said a few minutes ago because, the the Stooges, to me are tentpole kind of stuff. They're sort of kind of a
Seminal?
necessary building block to a lot of stuff, and they're the Stooges are kind of a given to me. So the fact that it sounds like you don't have much, if any, of a relationship with the Stooges at all is very intriguing to me. So talk to me about your relationship with this band and their music.
Well, in typical history of heavy fashion, I'm going to start talking about the Stooges by talking about Black Sabbath. Uh, so, uh, I got turned on to Black Sabbath in 1991,
Mhm.
and it was after they had been broken up for 10 years. Um, that's the kind of music fan I am. Like, Black Sabbath has been a seminal band ever since they were formed, and I didn't get it until many, many years after the end of Sabbath. Similarly with the Stooges, they are such a tentpole band. I just missed it. It was just something that was infrastructure. I've always known about the Stooges. I've known some Stooges songs, but I never had a personal relationship with the Stooges music. It was never in my circle of reference as far as what my friends were listening to. It was too early for me when I was coming up into music to be contemporarily relevant. It had already influenced the bands that influenced the bands that I was listening to. So while they were progenitors of punk rock, by the time I got into punk rock, it was pretty well evolved. And I landed with, Sex Pistols and Dead Kennedys and the Exploited and Minor Threat and these bands that were kind of can you say mainstream punk rock, um classic punk rock? I don't even know how to put it, but I was already past the Iggy and the Stooges or the Stooges phase, but I always knew about them. So to answer your question, I don't really have a relationship with the band, didn't really have a relationship with this song, but after hearing it, I've heard this song. I just didn't know it was the Stooges, and I didn't it wasn't part of my musical education or my musical catalog.
Right. I want to get into your opinion of it, but hold that for a minute. So I want to ask the same question this way because this Damian Abrahams of the band, the great Canadian band Fucked Up, has a great podcast called Turned Out a Punk, where he interviews people from all walks of life that grew up listening to punk. And the first question he asks everybody, which I will ask you now, is Dave, how did you get into punk? Do you remember the first time you ever heard punk? How you were introduced to punk rock?
Um, yeah, so I'm pretty sure that it was a multi-layered moment where I became aware of the Sex Pistols at the same time that a guy gave me a terrible recording of a tape, two-sided tape of Stiff Little Fingers. And I didn't know what I was listening to, but it moved me in a way that we've talked about how music is emotional, and it touched me. I was 13 or 14. I was 14, I think. And I had been discovering music, and as is common, I started with pop because it was available and radio would play it, and I had a radio. But as I started coming of age and getting into adolescence, punk rock is like the when you tune the radio dial, it's adolescence. It's like
Yeah.
it's that exact merge of angst and optimism and frenetic energy and sarcasm and snarkiness, and boldness. It's all of those things that adolescence is. So it was this sort of natural progression of things. When I was that age, I would see the T-shirts. It was just I was suddenly aware of it. And I remember going into the record store that was Budget Music. It was the record store in the strip mall near my house in Chula Vista, California, and suburb of San Diego, because that's kind of obscure if you don't know where Chula Vista is. Um, and it was just a very like brand new neighborhood. Chula Vista had an old part, but we were in the brand new part. So everything was stucco with red tile roofs and brand new strip malls, and then a long street of nothing, and then housing developments where every third house was the same. And so I went down to my local record store, and there were these two guys with long hair that were older, and I was like, "Hey, you guys, you seem cool. Can I want to get into punk rock? Can you tell me how?" And okay, all right, kid. And the dude like spent an hour with me going over this basically a list of all stars, and he like Bad Brains and um, MDC, and you know I can't even remember them now, but like those were the two at the top of the list, and so I got those two tapes that day. But I
Misfits,
kept going
GBH,
back.
Dead Kennedys, Black Flag, like it was
Yeah,
all that
all
era.
of that, all of that, right? It was all the right things.
Right.
But like there was this organic part, and then there was this sort of manufactured part where the organic part it was just in front of me somehow, Sex Pistols and Stiff Little Fingers. But then I went to the source and was like, okay, I want punk rock me, and then they did. So somehow between those two influences, I didn't have some particular person. I was the older brother of me and my brother. I was the older brother, so I didn't have somebody to explore this for me. The kids in my neighborhood were all younger, so it just wasn't around.
Right.
And I found it more or less on my own through this one organic channel and this one, like I say manufactured, but I guess intentional channel where I went asking for an education and was lucky enough to get somebody who cared enough about music to take it seriously. It was great.
That's a real high fidelity moment. That's
It was very, dude. Now that you mention it, it was
yeah,
extremely high fidelity.
yeah. That's the dream for a record store clerk to like let me just espouse my taste on this young person and tell them uh, everything that's right with the world. Like here's what you
These
could do.
guys are posers.
Yeah,
These
yeah.
guys are who you want to listen to.
So that's sort of the meat of to tie it back to the Stooges. So you go from this sort of 101 education. This is early 90s, late 80s.
This is 86.
Okay, okay. So you get this education of a lot of bands. Some of these bands are in their prime, but a lot of these bands at this point had broken up. Obviously,
Right?
the Pistols and a bunch of the bands would reform and whatever. But a lot of bands had the Misfits were long gone. Dead Kennedys were releasing their last record. Like it was toward the end of a lot of stuff. From there, though, you start to go forward. If I know your history right, that you start to listen to hardcore and local stuff. I guess what I'm asking is your inclination in terms of your musical education at that point is to go forward, not to go backwards. So you're not trying to find out who influenced these bands where you might uncover the Stooges. You're thinking what's next or what's now.
Well, and what can I connect with, right? Because to your point, these are these great bands that are either from New York or that have broken up, and there's no connection to it.
Mhm.
But in my junior year of high school, one of the guys at school was in a hardcore band, and he was the guitar player of a band, and one of the drummer was a singer in another band, and the bass player of that band was a guitarist in another band. So when one of them played, three of them played. And so it was it was $4 for three bands in somebody's garage. And it was super visceral because you're in somebody's garage and they're playing these instruments, the instruments that like you hear on the records. But these guys are playing and they're playing power chords like you hear on the records. And I didn't know you could do this. I didn't know that you could be a teenager in a band and come up with a sound as big as this and as clean as this. And like the thing about the hardcore scene, and I don't know how true this is universally, but the Chula Vista hardcore scene was all about the jugga jugga. It was like a
Yeah, palm muting. Yeah,
yeah, whew. And like it was
breakdown.
awesome.
Yeah,
And the whole crowd is singing in the mic, and there's less of a pit and more of like this whole mob because there's no room. You're literally in somebody's two-car garage with a car in it and like all the gardening tools. Um, but it's the straight edge hardcore scene, so everybody's a nice kid, right? And so it was
not all
this
those
really
suburban straight edge kids were nice, but
well
yeah,
at at 15, 16, 17, they hadn't gotten corrupted yet. They hadn't lost their way yet,
right.
right? So this was the straight edge kids in the prime of their straight edgeness. And it was good, clean fun. And so it was like, that's where I connected and I kept going forward. The other part of my story is, my dad was a city planner. We didn't have lots of money for frivolous things like records. That was not in my allowance. So I didn't have the ability to go backwards and forwards. I had kind of one opportunity to buy a tape every month and a half or something. And at the same time I was exploring punk, I was exploring what we know as alternative music, or what we called alternative music then. So I got big into like the Dead Milkmen.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and
Punk
Depeche
adjacent.
Mode was big. I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
punk adjacent. Dead
Punk
Milkman.
adjacent, right? The Pixies.
Mm-hmm.
Stuff like that. So there was it was hard for me to really go deep with music because at the same time I'm trying to have I couldn't consolidate all of my eggs in one particular basket. I didn't have that many eggs.
Right. Well, this is the first episode where we are really talking about punk. We've referenced punk in the MC5 conversation, in the Sonics conversation. We've kind of beat around the punk bush. We've talked about how punk isn't really kind of how we are defining sonically. Punk isn't necessarily the kind of heavy that we are mostly talking about, with a few exceptions. Tonight being an example of that exception. So I'll just talk about my history a little bit with punk and with the Stooges. My transition, or my musical life has always been about adoption. Growing up listening to Elton John and the Beatles, when I got to Kiss and AC/DC, I didn't dismiss the Elton John and the Beatles like a lot of people do. Is now I'm on to this thing and I don't listen to that thing. My musical journey has always been accumulating more. I continue to listen to the old stuff, but bring in the new stuff. So around junior high, I was in the discovery had been, the new wave of British heavy metal. It was Iron Maiden and Def Leppard and Saxon and all that stuff. And I'd been really into Van Halen and AC/DC, and Kiss was my childhood kind of favorite band. And then junior high kind of got exposed through shout out Marty Montalongo, the kid really responsible for, I remember being blown away by his record collection. But, mine was the big three. It was the Pistols, the Ramones, and the Clash. Those were the first bands I adopted and listened to them. Before, and then came Black Flag and Dead Kennedys and all that stuff. But the way the Stooges happened for me was part of this accumulation. And my thing was always, who were the bands I was listening to thanking on their records, or whose T-shirt was the band wearing, or whose songs was the band covering, or whatever. And the Sex Pistols did a cover of "No Fun," the Stooges song. And a buddy I was hanging out with at the time bought the first Stooges record, and that the main thing that the first Stooges that it's an incredible record, but the main thing that the first Stooges record has is "I Want to Be Your Dog," which is one of the greatest, most powerful, incredible songs ever written. And so that song was holy fuck, like even today, let alone in this would have been 1980 1982, 1983, something like that. And so had and was very aware of that first Stooges record, and then continued to accumulate and listen to music. Talk about some of these bands. The way I first was exposed really to the Misfits and GBH and Discharge in particular, three of my all-time favorite punk bands, was because Metallica was wearing their T-shirts. In that 82, 83 period, like, who's this band that we keep, So a lot of it was that and accumulated. But through that accumulation, and we all missed stuff and whatever, I really only knew the first Stooges record. Like, I knew Raw Power a little bit because I knew Search and Destroy, which the Chili Peppers had covered in the 80s. So I knew that record. Sonically, that record is so hard to listen to that I never really adopted it. But I missed Funhouse for many years and really only actually had Funhouse and listened to Funhouse at some point in the 90s was when I actually, through, I reading and hearing people like Steve Albini and Henry Rollins and whomever talking about it, was like, I always loved the Stooges, but had the go-to, the one record that I would always go to, but Funhouse. And ever since kind of really diving into that record, I mean, not only does it blow away the first record, in my opinion, it blows away almost every other record ever made. Like, I fucking love this record. Like, to me, it is, yes, it's a tent pole, and it's a signpost of what is to come, but it is so singular to me. Like, it sounds really like nothing else. It's like heavy, but it's spooky, but it's dirty, but it's psychedelic, and it's slow and sludgy, but it's fast and aggressive. Like, it's all of these things without a hint of trying to sell a single copy or be played on the radio. It's a very singular thing. It's way more intense than any Ramones record, than anything. I mean, than the Pistols record, than the Clash. I mean, I love all of those bands, but the Stooges is a sledgehammer to me, and all of those other things are like just like really good songs, So this record became like one of my records where it's like, you will know, you don't know I do this, but I do this. I have a running list in my notes app of my favorite 100 records of all time that I constantly update and take things off and revisit. And I'm like, oh no, that record's not actually as good as I thought, move things around. Funhouse has been on that list since I created it, many years ago now, and I don't expect it will ever leave. It is, to me, it is just kind of this perfect, not only encapsulation of 1970 and Detroit, Michigan, and all of that, but it's also like art without sounding like art. Like, it sounds like a bunch of drunken idiots in a garage, but it also somehow transcends that. It's really hard for me to describe Funhouse.
Because first of all, you had a real high fidelity moment there with your top 100 list that keeps changing. I watched that movie. I haven't read the book, but when I watched the movie, I see you in the movie.
Yeah,
Um,
I'm that guy.
and you're all of that guy. Like at different times, you're each of the different characters.
Mhm.
So I just had to get that in there. But I want to ask you. At one point, you said when I heard the record, and you held your for folks who are not watching but listening, you held your fists up about 12 inches apart. Were you listening to these on a
No,
record or on a
no.
tape
No.
or
So that's totally fair, and that's a reflex to do that.
yes?
No. The first Stooges record, yes. That's the only Stooges record I ever owned on vinyl.
Okay.
Funhouse I bought on CD.
Okay.
This would have been, I sold all of my records shortly after you and I met, at Amoeba on Haight Street in San Francisco,
Wow.
many years ago now.
What a high fidelity moment that guy had.
Yeah.
Uh, what?
Yeah.
You have this? What? You have the green vinyl of Creeping Death? What?
I had a pretty good record collection.
I think that's underselling the shit out of it.
Yeah,
Folks, his record collection was not epoch, but epic.
it was good. And it's fun now. I kind of think with everything available at my fingertips, I think record collecting is really silly. But that's a different conversation.
Well, it's
Um,
just collecting. It's object collecting.
right, it's
But
object
because
collecting.
you also mentioned reading the liner notes about who the bands thanked. And like I was in audio cassette tapes, right? And so the writing's tiny. There's no liner notes, there's no posters, there's no pullouts. And I know that record albums often had these additional marketing features that were tangible. So I was wondering, you said a couple things there, and so that's what led me to ask the question. But I'm sorry I interrupted.
Yeah, no, please interrupt because I'll just go on and on. Yeah, when I read that list of bands, or when I read that list of bands that have covered um the Stooges or songs specifically off of Funhouse, it's a pretty good representation of a lot of my musical taste. The Birthday Party and Sonic Youth and Mission of Burma and The Damned and Depeche Mode. It's like that that's a really good indication of the breadth of influence the Stooges and this record in particular had on all of these different styles of music and all of these different personalities. Um,
Yeah, when you
and
have Sonic Youth and Depeche Mode in the same sentence, uh, that's interesting.
yeah, I mean, two of my favorite bands of all time, and
Very musically different, and so to have them
yeah,
be have a common, have the Stooges be the Venn diagram crossover for them is just interesting to note.
yeah, you know why I think, and this is what I think I was trying to say about Funhouse is both Sonic Youth and Depeche Mode are very musically curious and musically experimental and very musically, you know, not follow. They're following their own rule book.
Sure,
Um, a lot of the band, Stiff Little Fingers you talked about, the scene in High Fidelity. The kid walks into the store and Stiff Little Fingers. Um, um, it's not Alternative Ulster. It's the other. It's the other.
inflammable materials.
That's the album. But
Oh,
Jesus, it's people are yelling. It's their most famous song. I can't. It's not coming to me. But the song is playing. It's Suspect Device
oh,
is playing on. I think that's the song. Playing in the store, and a customer walks in and goes, "Is this the new Green Day?" And the clerk says, "No, it's Stiff Little Fingers. You got to. Oh, you don't know inflammable material. You got to know this record." Um, that to me is the difference. Is so many bands that were influenced by bands like Stiff Little Fingers or the Ramones or whoever just sound exactly like Stiff Little Fingers or the Ramones. And there's some great bands that did that. I love the Descendants. The Descendants are just doing the Ramones. You
yeah,
know,
yeah, yeah.
um, the bands that were influenced by the Stooges don't fucking sound like the Stooges. They sound like the fucking birthday party, you know, which, it's a different thing, but that's the arty part of the Stooges that I think is so appealing, that I think so many of the punks and all that music's great, but I think so many of the punks missed because they're just playing hard and fast. It's like we talk about the Sabbath influence. It's like you're missing the nuance and the groove and the swing, and all you're doing is the heavy. I think the Stooges were doing a lot more than just four on the floor blast beats, pounding at you over the head, and to me that's why they're heavy. That's why we're talking about the Stooges and we're not talking about Stiff Little Fingers.
Yes, so good, really good way to bring it around, because talking about this song in particular, that was the thing that stuck out to me, was um, we've talked about this before, where a band or a singer or a song will have a certain quality of just confidence.
Mm.
And this band wasn't doing whatever they were doing. They weren't doing it for commercial success. Whatever they were doing, they weren't doing it to mimic whatever their influences were. Whatever they were doing intentionally and confidently. And that sound comes through. And when I'm listening to this song, I'm thinking, I had this impression of Iggy Pop being this fucking Gigi Allen kind of
Mm.
character, right? And there's elements there in his stage performance, but the recorded version of this song is totally together. It's like good musicianship, well built song structure, tight playing. Um, Even the range of his vocals, the pace of the song is slow. It's got a groove, but it's got this heaviness of presence. It's just like, we know who we are who we are, here we are. Uh, it was interesting to me to for how it landed, because of my peripheral relationship with the Stooges, and because of my half of my more of my 80% of my connection with them is like Iggy Pop, the persona, and the like 50-year-old plus Iggy Pop, which is a different guy, right? Listening to Iggy Pop's interview on Fresh Air with Terry Gross on NPR, you know, uh, seeing him with Tom Waits in uh, Coffee and Cigarettes. Um, you know, my connection to Iggy Pop is not this guy, and remembering that the guy that I have seen and come in contact with comes from this, is fun and interesting. But hearing this song, like, I got to go and listen to the whole discography now. And I didn't have time to really get into it. This particular last couple of weeks has been busy personally. Um, but this is now, like, I'm going to have a couple of international flights coming up. And guess what? That's a whole lot of discography exploration time right there.
Yeah, that's
So
exciting.
this is on my list. I'm really excited to like listen and pay attention in a way that I'm not usually connected to music. Music is usually something that I have on in the background, and music is usually, often for me, it's something that I've got a relationship with and I'm listening to for that comfort, or it's something on my Spotify playlist that has run out, and now Spotify's algorithm, which I got to say is pretty good, is feeding me new stuff. Um, that I don't have time to sit and listen like I did when I was 14, and looking at liner notes and feeling feelings. We didn't have the internet. We didn't have the internet in 1986. So I couldn't scroll on my phone. I couldn't be distracted. I had to sit down and actively listen. And
Right.
I don't know that like we haven't really talked about that, but that's something that both you and I in our musical education and evolution, that's a part of it. Is there was no other distraction going on. You're holding the record album, you're looking at the art, and you're still holding it, still looking at it for an hour or for 45 minutes or whatever the play of that album is. So you really deeply make that connection.
Right. Yeah, it's a blessing and a curse, you know, that part of it where you know every record you own backwards and forwards because there's a limit to what you own and what you
Right.
can hear. The beauty of today is, you know, I'm sitting on my couch 3 days ago and I text my buddy Russell, who I haven't talked to in many years, and I said, "Hey, I was thinking about you. You have great taste in music. Send me 5 records that you don't think I've probably ever heard before." And he sent me a bunch of music you would love. He sent me this Brazilian jazz record I'd never heard of. He sent me this Art Blakey record that he made with Thelonious Monk in
Oh,
the 60s. That's incredible. He sent me this like weird electronic goth record, like a bunch of shit that I love that he just sent me the Spotify link. And now I have this record.
right,
You know,
right,
I added
right,
10 records to my collection in half an hour.
right.
But I won't listen to any of those 10 records nearly as much as I heard the first Clash record, you know?
Yep, yep.
So that's different.
And you
But
won't
back,
know who they thanked in their liner notes.
well, so I think that's better now too, right? Like I know everybody that's covered the Stooges to have this conversation with you because I was able to click on a link and read an article online. Like I wouldn't have been able to do that, you know.
Right,
So I
right.
can figure out who the Stooges' influences are or who they influenced a lot easier today than I could by reading the liner notes of the first album.
Fair, fair, fair.
Um, but the discography is it's really the first record, Funhouse, and Raw Power. Like those are the only 3 you need to know. But the interesting thing about Iggy, you talk about his transformation from I like the idea from you know Iggy and the Stooges to Coffee and Cigarettes is apt. But he has this amazing period in the middle, right? David Bowie falls in love with the Stooges and adopts Iggy Pop, and he produces Raw Power, and then he produces the first 2 Iggy solo records, which are fucking great. He writes China Girl for Iggy Pop. Um, you know, like he reinvents Iggy as this kind of cool, like Lower East Side hipster crooner guy. And they make incredible music together. And so Iggy's had this, he's been a bit of a musical chameleon and just made a ton of great music. But you know, I said this last week, I was excited to do the Sabbath and Stooges episodes back to back because I do think there are a lot of parallels between the two bands. You know, we talked last week about, you know, the depressed environment that was Birmingham, England, and the Stooges hailing from, you know, Ann Arbor, but for all intents and purposes, Detroit, Michigan, also a depressed industrial town, very gritty, you know, going for it, a really original sound that takes these kind of obvious influences and turns them into something completely different, completely invents a genre over their first couple of records. You know, they have a lot in common with Sabbath, and specifically on Loose. And I want to know what you thought when you first listened to the song. But the reason I picked Loose specifically is for Dave Alexander's bass.
Yeah.
Is you know, the song starts with guitar, and Ron Ashton's guitar is great. I love him as a guitar player, but it's not heavy. It's very kind of punk rock guitar. And when the bass production on Funhouse, but on Loose in particular, the bass is so thick
Mm-hmm.
and heavy that it's like it makes me want to run through a wall when the bass first comes in and starts playing with the guitar, which is preceded by 4 bars or whatever. I love that moment, and the light clicked this week because we've spent so much time talking about Geezer, and it's like all the praise obviously goes to this to Ozzy and Iggy. You know, their names are very close too.
Yeah.
They go to Ozzy or Iggy, John and Jim by birth. Um, and then the credit goes to Tony and Scott Ashton. But Geezer and Dave Alexander are real heroes in these bands, and the heaviness specifically for Sabbath and for the Stooges is indebted a lot to the bass. So tell me just what you thought about Loose and kind of that Sabbath comparison.
I think it's very apt because that's the way I would explain it if I had more time to think about it. Um, the the bass was very present and noticeable, and the production of it was bass forward. And the way the composition of the song is before, it's very kind of clean and sparse in a way that I didn't expect from Stooges music. And I think that I'm a little bit confusing or conflating Stooges and New York Dolls sometimes. Um, they were contemporaneous, but they were not the same band. Like they were doing similar things, but differently. And realizing that the Stooges really had this more refined, in this song, a very refined sound. And to be able to have the vocals be so clear and gentle in a way,
Mm.
um, I stick it deep inside, like just it's the way that goes in a higher register and everything. And so there's that bass that's driving, and it's kind of holding everything so that it can play lightly above, but there's that bass just giving it the support. um, really, it really came through and really connected. I really connected with it. Uh, and that was one of the things I wanted to make sure that we talked about. So I'm glad that you brought it up. Um, I'm hoping that that is a thread that I hear through the rest of the album and the rest of the discography, because that was pleasant. But
I
you're
think
right.
what you're
It's very much like it's a it's such a supportive element that without that support, things you can't build on that. You can't build on a foundation that doesn't have something that supportive.
right. Right. Yeah. Something I think you'll really appreciate about Funhouse specifically, but the Stooges in general, they weren't one note. They weren't the
Right.
Ramones.
Right.
Every song didn't sound the same. It's to again make the Sabbath comparison. There's slow, sludgy stuff. There's kind of arty, cacophonous stuff. There's fast, upbeat stuff. There's a very prominent saxophone all throughout Funhouse that works in a very cool kind of acid jazz kind of way. Um, so there's a lot going on, and I to me, you talk about Venn diagrams. I think as it relates to heavy, where the Stooges potentially sit is somewhere between Sabbath and the Velvet Underground. You know,
Yes, yes, yes. There was a Lou Reedy quality to the vocals that I
yeah,
almost said but forgot. Yes, 100% yes.
yeah, yeah. Um,
So, question. This is a great song, and I'm glad that you chose it. I Want to Be Your Dog kind of seems like a more obvious choice for the heaviness because it's got a little creepier, like, tempo to it or sound to
Creepy
it.
is a good word for "I Want to Be Your Dog." That guitar, that descending guitar riff is
Yes,
very creepy.
yes. So what made your decision?
Funhouse primarily. I think "Wanna Be Your Dog" is the single best Stooges song. I think it's one of the best songs ever written by anybody. um, but I think,
You got to be careful, man. You've said that like 2 dozen times on this
well,
podcast.
I get excited in these conversations. Um, and if I have 100 favorite albums of all time, I probably have 10,000 favorite songs of all time. So
Well, and I think that's why it keeps changing, right? You're like, oh, it's only 100, and I'm looking at 80 through 100, so I got to put this one on. Oh, well, I missed. Okay, like,
I think
yeah,
I Want to Be Your Dog is just below Bringing on the Heartbreak by Def Leppard, which is also a fucking jam. But that's a different conversation and not for the heavy chronology. But
no, because then we have to talk about No One Like You, and
oh, great. God, the Scorpions were so good until they weren't.
I
Um,
know.
but it's Def Leppard too were so good until they weren't. But so I Want to Be Your Dog. It's the obvious choice, I guess, for one, and didn't want to pick the obvious choice. But also, I wanted to talk about Funhouse because I like Funhouse. The first Stooges record is great. I love it. It's great. But Funhouse is just another level to me. So I wanted to be able to talk about the record.
All right, good.
Yeah.
I just wanted to get you on record for that because I knew there was a methodology
Yeah.
behind these
For,
decisions.
for sure. I hope you do that Stooges deep dive and that we can come back to them, not the way we do Sabbath with every episode, but I think the influence of the Stooges, less so because probably more punk and avant-garde than heavy necessarily, but I think the influence of the Stooges will be able to trace throughout some future episodes of the show.
Yeah, and like let's not, you know, poo-poo our own brilliant selves here. We've called back a number of episodes and compared and contrasted. And I think that it's wise and appropriate to build the narrative and call back where we were and where we are and how they connect and how they're going to move forward.
Yeah.
So
No, that's the fun of it. It's the building on itself that is it's
yeah.
really fun.
So I am going to do the research and I'm going to watch that movie and um we'll find opportunities to weave it back into the
You're
narrative.
gonna love that movie. Anything else about Loose or Funhouse or the Stooges for tonight that you didn't hit that you wanted to?
Just more pleasantly surprised than I thought I would be. Um and really more motivated to deeper dive into this band than some of the others that are new to me that we've talked about.
Well, I'm excited. That's a win. When we did our 1970s episode, or sorry, our 1960s recap, you mentioned there was nothing specifically that you were super excited to go back to or put into heavy rotation. So maybe I got one with the Stooges, which is exciting.
Yeah, and I also think we're getting into an area that's more familiar to me and like
Right.
the stuff that we have talked about prior to 1970 was all like warm up, right? It's all stuff that gets us to where we're going. And with the Sabbath episode, that's sort of the pre and post Sabbath world. And so now we have this, I think we're in a different territory now. So this is probably going to happen more and more.
Excellent. The territory is about to get real weird for a few episodes, which I will talk about for a second. But before we do that, we have to do what we do every week, and that is get into Song v Song, where we pit our current champion against tonight's topic. Dave, you currently have Led Zeppelin's Dazed and Confused from episode 16 as your champion. My champion is one of my favorite songs of all time. That would be Inagata Devita by Iron Butterfly from episode 11. My gushing enthusiasm, as you may have been able to tell, will in fact have me dethroning Iron Butterfly and the mighty Itagata Devita tonight. And my new champion is now Loose by the Stooges. Dave, what about you, man? How did the Stooges do against Zeppelin?
The Stooges are great. I enjoyed the song. Zeppelin wins the day on the Song v Song.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Well, so those are our current champions, Led Zeppelin and the Stooges. That's a pretty mighty duo, so I think we can both feel pretty good about that. I mentioned that we're going to get a little weird next week. It's not so much weird as I think a little more obscure. The next few episodes, I promise, will be a little shorter. Both this week about the Stooges and last week about Sabbath were both longer episodes. We got this run of songs
How did
coming
that
up
happen?
that
Yeah.
are a little more obscure, and I don't think we will have as much to say. At least I won't have as much to say about the bands themselves, but I do want to deep dive into these songs. Starting next week, with a not very well known band called Stray and their song "All in My Mind," which I have a very strong fondness for. So I think that will be a fun conversation. I'm really looking forward to hearing your opinion on that. So that will be next week, episode 23. Until then, thanks for listening, and stay heavy.
Okay, thank you. Bye.